Beyond crazy, Dr. Graeme Cunningham. When Cunningham immigrated to Canada and eventually began practice in central and northern Ontario, money was no problem. Medicare ensured that a big fat check arrived regularly. Now, he could afford to buy as much alcohol as he desired, and all the good brands too. His first wife, with whom Cunningham says he often drank, and with whom he had 2 children, left him in the early 1970s for another man. The breakup fed into Graeme's belief that, at his core, he was not a good person. The fact he had an excellent and growing reputation in medicine, he didn't drink on the job in those days, was irrelevant. By this time, I had what I call my voice, and my voice goes something like this. I'd get an award, or I'd get a title, or I'd get a position of authority, like chief resident, medicine, and on the outside people would be saying, "Good for you, well done," and my voice would say, "If you only knew me, if you only knew the things that I was doing and the person that I was becoming, you'd never speak to me again, and you would leave." So there was an inside feeling of not being good enough. I was fake. I was inadequate. Do you get the sense of egomania with an inferiority complex? The arrogant doctor who doesn't like himself? And the arrogance is a front of fear. And so, at times, it was impossible to stay in my own skin, so I continued to drink, and I moved from the point of enjoying alcohol to the point of actually needing it to feel, to survive, to get by. Despite everything, he still believed he was nothing like his father. The mistake was in not realizing that his father had more than 20 extra years of alcoholism under his belt. In reality, Cunningham was already on the same path, he just couldn't see where it was leading. In the context of this illness, the first thing you lose and the last thing you get back is insight. I mean, you would look at me and say, "Jesus, Graeme, do you not see what you're doing?" And I really wouldn't. And then one day, who should make a return visit to the office? Pathetic old Rick. It had been about a month since Cunningham had sent him on his way, shaking his head at the poor bastard misfortune. Except this Rick looked great. He was wearing a suit, his belly was flat, the jaundice was gone, his eyes crystal clear. The man who had walked out of the office so wretched and miserable now looked reborn. Rick had got his job back, his family life, and he wasn't drinking. There was something, attractive about Rick now had. Cunningham asked him how he'd managed to achieve it. "I'm staying sober, Doc, in a program called Alcoholics Anonymous." On some level, Graeme knew that he needed help, so he decided to sit in on a few AA meetings himself. They scared the hell out of him. The honesty threatened me. The out-and-out just straight sharing was beyond me. I would drink before I went, drink after I left, so it didn't work. But the seed had been sown over time. As Cunningham's alcoholism progressed, when it finally, inevitably began to show itself at work, he started drinking vodka on the job. He had an epiphany. While at the hospital, he had a sudden and clear revelation that if he continued drinking, he would die. So shattering and pure was this insight that a very shaken alcoholic went home and immediately poured a drink to cope. I was sitting in my basement. It was 10 o'clock at night. It was a Friday, 3rd of January, 1986. In Timmins, as deep in snow outside, 30 below, and a voice said, literally in my ear, "I'm staying sober, Doc," in a program called Alcoholics Anonymous. I'll never forget that. Rick was literally sitting right beside me. He wasn't, but that's what I heard. It was his voice as clear as I'm sitting here. Cunningham picked up the phone and called the local AA line. Someone immediately answered. Cunningham gave his address. Some 30 seconds later, and he's not kidding, there was a knock on his door. The person manning the AA phone that night lived just 3 doors down the street. After a Timmins treatment, a few days drinking coffee and puking into a bucket in his neighbor's basement while AA stewards told him their own stories, Dr. Cunningham was on his way to an alcohol rehab in Toronto. Just then, a pleasant woman came up and put her hand on his shoulder. She introduced herself as Anne, said she'd been there 10 days and that she'd show him around. Cunningham told her how awful he felt. "Yes, I know, it's rough on the first day or two," she replied. I said, "But I should know better." "Why?" "Because I'm a doctor." And she said, "So am I." Cunningham never drank again. His personal, professional, and spiritual growth in the coming years would lead to his becoming the director of the addiction division at the Homewood Health Center in Guelph, and an associate professor of psychiatry at McMaster University. It would also lead to his learning that his own recovery depended on sharing the possibilities of sobriety with others, dependent on helping. To keep it, I've got to give it away. To keep my sobriety, to keep my recovery, I have to give it away. That's moving from that place of infantile omnipotence, when I was sick and feeling I was the center of the world and the world owned me, to a place, and I'm using psychiatric and psychology jargon, of altruistic service, where I can be of service to my fellow person without reservation. In other words, I'd look to a heroin addict and I don't care who they are, what they've done, where they've come from. I'm just glad they're here and ask myself, what can I do to help them change?